Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jalen Jones. The North Carolina State Legislature is back in session with a lot on the docket. From a potential book ban to Medicaid changes that could affect millions of North Carolinians. WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran has been on top of all of this. We recorded a conversation for our WRAL YouTube channel on April 23rd at the State Legislative Building. Here's that discussion. Hello everybody, welcome in. My name is Jalen Jones, digital producer here at WRAL. I'm here with Will Doran, NC Capitol, amazing guy. We're here right here at the state legislature. He calls it the People's House.
That's exactly right.
Exactly. And there's a lot going on right now. The legislature is back in session. And we have a lot of questions and a lot of things that are happening that are going on. And first things first, we're going to start talking about a book ban that's happening in Chapel Hill.
That's right.
Absolutely. So lawmakers grilled local school officials about books in elementary school libraries. What are the lawmakers' concerns here?
So they're worried that when they passed a law a few years ago called the Parents' Bill of Rights, it was intended to cut down on instruction, especially in elementary schools, related to sexual orientation, gender identity, things like that. Mm-hmm. And they say that Chapel Hill's Carborough schools have a lot of books along those themes still in their school libraries. And what we heard from the Chapel Hill schools leaders was, hey, that's not against the law. You know, y'all only told us not to have curriculum, not to have instruction focused on these things. We don't teach any of these books. They're just there in case kids want to check them out. Mm-hmm. They said, and furthermore, we've got books on, video games, and on sports figures, and on superheroes, yes. And we have comic books, but none of that is part of our curriculum, part of our instruction. It's just, we've got 10,000 books in the library, and, we touch on all sorts of topics. So lawmakers say that they have a problem with that. They think that basically the Chapel Hill people are right, that state law doesn't ban those sorts of books, and so they want to ban them. They said, and this is not just Chapel Hill, this would be statewide if this bill goes into effect. It just got filed a few minutes ago, so we're still really pouring through it, trying to figure out all of the ramifications, but essentially it would say that any elementary school in the state couldn't have any books that deal with sexual orientation, gender identity, things like that. And if those issues even got raised in the classroom, the school would actually have to notify parents if kids are even talking about those kinds of issues.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you touched on the statewide ramifications as well. So lawmakers say that the district is breaking the law. Officials say that they're not. What does the law say? And what part of the law do lawmakers say that they're breaking?
There's another part of the law that they really honed in on that deals with students who are questioning their gender identity. Maybe they're transgender, maybe they're not really sure. And it says, the law says that when a student wants to change their pronouns, change the name that they use at school, that the teachers have to identify or to inform the parents about that. And there's a carve out in the law that says that they don't have to inform the parents if there are concerns about, the student being abused. Yeah. And lawmakers are concerned that Chapel Hill is trying to find a loophole in that and basically get away with not telling parents about this with some just kind of looser language and, talking about strife in the home. And the lawmakers are saying, well, we didn't write strife in the home into law. We said, physical abuse. And so, it doesn't matter if you think that the parents are going to be mad or upset or confused, you still have to tell them. Mm-hmm. And the Chapel Hill leaders are saying, well, we don't know. And also, sometimes we let the students know that we're going to have to tell their parents, and then they tell us, oh, never mind, I don't want to actually change anything then, if that's what's going to happen. And so then we don't think that we actually have to tell the students that the kids brought it up. And so this bill is also seeking to address some of those issues as well, basically just more teeth to this law about making sure that parents know everything that's going on in their kid's life, and basically that schools aren't keeping secrets from the parents.
Absolutely. Makes sense. That makes sense. House Majority Leader House Majority Leader Brendan Jones, what is his role in all of this?
He's really leading this charge, and he's been doing this for a few months. There was a hearing back in December, people may remember. He picked up a book, threw it, said this is trash.
I remember that video.
Exactly. It kind of went viral, and it was, again, regarding the Chapel Hill schools folks. And he said, look, we were very clear in that December meeting when I picked up that book and threw it, that we're not happy with the kind of books you guys have in your libraries, with how you're, not seeming to take this as seriously as Republicans in the legislature want them to. said, we don't see that you've made any changes. And so they hauled them back in for a new hearing today to basically yell at them again. It was a 3-hour-long hearing, very tense, between the school leaders, the legislature, and, we could see, further ramifications. Of course, state legislature controls the budget. And schools get a lot of their funding from the state, so they might decide, hey, if, schools are out of compliance with what we want them to do, maybe we'll just, not give them quite as much funding as we normally would.
Absolutely. So that's the power that they have over these schools to enforce this.
The power of the purse, absolutely.
Absolutely. So similar book bans have faced challenges in court. Could that be the future here? Is that kind of the direction we're heading with this?
It could. I mean, to be clear, this is a bill that just got filed a couple of minutes ago. It hasn't even had a committee hearing yet. It hasn't even got up to a vote yet, so it's far from becoming law. But if this were to become law, then yes, it would almost certainly face a lawsuit. And we've seen, other states that have been challenged in court, and there's kind of a mixed record on that. Some places it's been shot down, some places it hasn't. The Supreme Court probably is going to have to step in and decide eventually, because this is a bigger nationwide trend that we're seeing of, states trying to crack down more on, how much exposure and what kind of exposure do children get to the concept of LGBTQ themes and families. And that's something that we heard today too from Democrats. They said, look, some of these books that you have on your list of, supposedly, according to the Republicans, being inappropriate, featuring sexual material. One Democrat said, I read the book, and literally all it was there was a character who had 2 moms. And gay marriage is legal.
Yes.
In the U.S. And he said, what is inappropriate about that? There's nothing different than a character that has straight parents. And why are we more concerned with this book than any other book containing a character who has parents?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Will, for breaking it down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll have more from our WRAL State Government reporter, Will Doran. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. Here's more from my discussion with WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran on the latest for a state budget. Now, the book ban conversation was very interesting and entertaining as well, but the budget is the biggest focus for lawmakers right now.
For sure. Yeah.
What is the latest on negotiations?
Well, the latest is that there really hasn't been any sort of progress for months that we know of. They're meeting, they're talking, but we haven't seen any indication that a deal has been made, because if there was a deal, they would have put it out there. And that's something that, to your point about the entertainment of this whole book ban hearing, Democrats really hounded Republicans on that today. They said, look, we don't have a state budget. We've got, all these other problems facing the state, and y'all are just, dangling this red meat out there of this culture war stuff. And why are we essentially wasting our time on this issue? Now, of course, according to the Republicans, states are breaking the law and, violating parents' rights, and that is a big issue to them. So that's just a big political fight that we've got going on here. But in general, not really a whole lot of progress on the budget. Obviously, we don't go into a government shutdown here in North Carolina when we don't have a budget. We just keep operating on the previous budget that was passed. But, for here and us in North Carolina, the previous budget that was passed was in the 2023-2024 session. So, we've added a whole lot of people, hundreds of thousands, not over 1 million people to North Carolina since then. Obviously, inflation still continues to exist, so we're really operating on a very outdated spending plan as the legislature continues to struggle to figure out a deal for a new plan.
Very important. What are 3 issues? Can you name me 3 issues that are going to have the biggest political ramifications if the budget is not passed?
Well, one that they are already starting to address is Medicaid.
Okay.
But it's huge.
We're going to get to that.
We will.
Yes.
1 in every 4 North Carolinians relies on Medicaid.
Wow, that's a big number.
Yes. 3 million people. And, the program, for those who aren't familiar, it serves low-income families, lots of children, disabled folks, a few others, but that's kind of the main focus of Medicaid. And it's going to run out of money in just a couple of weeks because of this lack of a budget. State employees also going without a raise. And there's, a question of, okay, once they do, if they do eventually reach a budget deal, do they give retroactive raises to state employees? Do they not give those retroactive raises? Do they maybe come up with some sort of just a one-time bonus that they pay out to them? So those are some questions that we're looking at as well. And then also, just any new projects the state needs to do, like repairs to our public universities, new road construction, things like that. All of that is on hold because we don't have a budget.
Absolutely. Big deal. Big deal. All right. So Stein has laid out his budget wish list. What are his priorities?
Well, the governor's priorities don't really matter, if we're being honest, because he's a Democrat. The legislature is controlled by Republicans. Medicaid is his really main priority that he has, but, he also has laid out, he wants to see, bigger raises for teachers. He wants to see the state essentially end the private school voucher program that pays for families to send their kids to private schools, or at least to really cut it back and use that money to pay for things like teacher pay raises or, other issues that he has. He also wants to take a pause on some of the state's income tax cuts and instead focus on things like a child care tax credit and a sales tax holiday, like a back to school holiday. We used to have that a decade or more ago, but the legislature's repealed it. And these are actually things that some Republicans agree with him on. Republicans in the House say, yeah, we should take a pause on these income tax cuts and focus more on these things that are going to help more low-income people, working families, like the sales tax holiday, like the child care tax credit. But Republicans in the Senate don't want to do any of that. They want to just forge ahead with those income tax cuts, and that is really at the heart of this budget standoff that we've got.
And I do want to take a beat and remind people, how much power does the governor have here in North Carolina?
Very little. Historically, we've always, for centuries, had one of the weakest governor's offices in the country, and that was by design, hundreds of years ago. But it has, really just gotten exacerbated really in the last decade, ever since Roy Cooper won, and then, Josh Stein after him. The Republicans in the legislature have stripped away lot more power from the governor. But the biggest power that the governor has is really the bully pulpit. They're elected statewide. They're kind of a spokesman for the state. And, when they speak, people listen. And, Josh Stein, he won in a landslide election in 2024. And so, there are a lot of Republicans who voted for him for governor. And so, when he stands up and, says, I don't think Republicans are, serving the state well with this budget standoff, and here are the things that I think they should be doing, he speaks with some authority.
People are going to listen. People are going to listen. So we talked about kind of the overlap of Republicans and Governor Josh Stein and his priorities as well. Stein and lawmakers on Medicaid, in terms of funding, have some agreement. Can you expound upon that?
Yeah, I alluded to this earlier. Medicaid obviously running out of money within days or weeks. The target we've been given is just sometime in May.
Yes.
And we are recording this just a couple days before May.
So and we're recording this on April 23rd for people to know.
And so, this deadline is fast approaching, and the legislature did basically give Stein everything he wanted. He said, we need $319 extra million to fund Medicaid. And the legislature said, okay, here's your $319 million. That is probably going to pass the final vote next week, a few days from now. It's on the calendar. But they also put in a few things to that bill that Stein did not ask for. For instance, he had wanted some extra funding to find fraud in the program. They didn't do that, but they are funding a new program to basically look into DHHS and try to find waste inside state government, which obviously that's part of the Stein administration. So there's a little bit of, political, issues there. Okay, are they using this to, try to create some sort of narrative about the state? And there's a whole lot of other new oversight and rules that they want to put in there that are essentially intended to kick people off Medicaid. And what we've heard from Republicans is they said, what the House Speaker told me, he said 99% of people who are on Medicaid every year stay on it the next year.
Okay.
And that just seems impossible because of the income eligibility requirements. And so they think that the state isn't doing enough to kick off people, that they're allowing people to remain on Medicaid after they're no longer eligible, and that has just been ballooning the costs for the state. So they really want to get in there, kick a lot of people off the coverage, cut costs for the state taxpayers.
Absolutely. So what's next with this bill?
Well, it passed with near unanimous support in the initial votes. There's still another vote that's expected. It's going to pass that too. Then it heads to the governor's office. I've asked the governor's office what his stance is on this. I mean, like I said, he's getting what he wanted on the money, but they haven't told me explicitly that he's going to sign this into law, which is a little strange, especially since it passed almost unanimously in the legislature. They just tell me he's reviewing the bill.
And that's because of those catches that the Republicans have put in.
Exactly. I'm sure he has lawyers looking into those and trying to figure out exactly what it all means. But, it'll probably happen, but it is just not fully across the line yet.
Absolutely. Well, we know that you'll stay on top of it. Thanks, Will.
Absolutely. Thanks.
That's WRAL State Government Reporter Will Doran. And for his continued coverage on the state legislature, make sure you go to the NC Capital section of WRAL.com. I'm Jalen Jones, and thank you so much for joining, and thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and making us a part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news, in addition to our YouTube channel, is our morning briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for your day. Make sure you sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.